Hi everybody, I've been doing videos on Leica rangefinder cameras for quite a while, and the one I've had the longest and the one I still have and the one I still love to use is my Leica M6, and that's why I want to tell you a little bit more about it and also discuss with you why film photography is probably coming back, or why it's still worth to do film photography in times of digital. So in the last few years, there seems to be a certain degree of revival of film photography. While maybe like 10 years back or 5 years back, a lot of film stock used to disappear, now film stock is coming back. Some major companies are starting to produce film, certain types of film again, and this is quite promising because many of us still feel the interest in film photography, because film photography, even in times of digital photography, and even if in terms of image quality may not be ahead of advanced digital photography, it still has a few things about it that make it interesting, that keep it interesting. So I want to discuss this with you. While discussing this, I want to point out why the Leica M6, that was my first Leica, is still one of the cameras I love most, and I still love to use it. And then I will show you a little bit of how to use it, maybe tell you why, if you're interested in a film camera, this might be a good solution for you. So what is it about the Leica M6? No, sorry. What is it about film photography that is still interesting in times of digital photography? Film photography has one aspect that is quite essential, and even if I do both, I do catch myself, for example, looking at the image I just took when I do digital photography, trying to redo images, making a judgment based on what I see the first second after I took the image on the back of my digital camera. And also having the possibility to shoot basically unlimited volume, about an unlimited volume of photographs on digital, that makes you less selective when framing, choosing your subject, looking at your light and everything. So having 36 shots in your camera makes you more selective, makes you focus more on details than when you know that if I'm not happy with the shot I just took, I can retake it immediately. So this is why film photography still has something about it. There's also one other thing that's not so much for me because I'm not a professional photographer, but for professional photographers, and I hear that a lot, and you see many YouTube videos where people express this point of view, that for their job they use digital photography because it's the more efficient photography, but they use film photography for their personal stuff, for their personal projects, for their private fun, because it's more, it's easier to let go of your environment and things like that. I mean, this is philosophy maybe, but it's still something that not only I feel, but others feel too. So if I'm focusing on getting a result, most probably digital photography is still the best solution. If I'm focusing on the process of taking pictures, of choosing your image, of setting up your image, then film photography is a good solution. So let me get into the Leica. The Leica M6 is what you could call the essence of Leica film photography in terms of rangefinder. It was the last fully mechanical rangefinder, with the exception of the MP, that as far as I know is still being produced now, and then there's this MA or something like that. That is a newer version of a Leica rangefinder M camera. But in terms of the Leica family, before starting digital, this was the last fully mechanical Leica rangefinder film camera. It is, as I said, fully mechanical, so it works without. It also works without batteries. The batteries are just to use the light meter. So you have a light meter, a very simple one that shows you arrows in the screen or in the viewfinder that show you in which direction you can correct. So if you say you want to change the aperture, you go in the direction of the arrows. And if you want to change the exposure by changing the aperture, the shutter speed, you go against the direction shown by the arrow. I don't know if that's clear, but you know, if you're familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about, and if you're not familiar with it, it's quite easy to learn. So just the light meter to help you to not have to necessarily to use an external light meter, and for everything else it's a mechanical camera. It's quite compact, it's quite dense, it's not a lightweight camera, but it feels extremely solid. And this one is, let me think, is about a little more than 30 years old. I got it as a present 31 years ago, and it's still perfect. I haven't used it extremely, but I used it constantly for over 30 years and it's still perfect. The design is what you can say Leica is basing their rangefinder design on. Even now with the switch from the 240, 246 to the new M10, basically they went back to a design that was closer to the M6. So this is what I can tell you about the M6 and the feeling of using it. It has some pros and cons, yes. The pros are it's really solid, it's extremely reliable, it's fully mechanical, it has a light meter, so you don't have to use an external light meter. If you want, you can obviously support, because the exposure metering is you know, it's not very modern, so you don't have spot metering. You have a center weight metering that can help you to get the general idea of the exposure, but sometimes you have to measure the exposure and then reframe the image to get a correct exposure. That's something you learn with time. What else? There's another aspect. If you buy a used one now, it kind of probably keeps its value or may even go up in value. So this is not what I can promise to you, but if you buy one now, the probability that in 5 or 10 years it's gonna lose value is quite small. So most probably you will have something that if you want to get rid of in say 5 years, you will probably get your money back, and maybe even more. There are a few cons. In terms of usability, now being used to having at least aperture priority, some automatic functions are quite common. This one has none. There was the M7 that has aperture priority, but this one is really just a mechanical camera with a built-in light meter. The viewfinder clarity is not extremely good. You have this central patch that you use for metering, for measuring the distance, for focusing. It's kind of, depending on the light you have, it's not perfect. As far as I understand, there may have been a late version of the M6 and probably the MP that had a better, clearer patch, measuring patch. This one does not, but honestly, it's something that you can get used to. It's not something that will, if you maybe compare it to the viewfinder, even of a modern like digital rangefinder camera, you see the difference, but it's not tragic. So and then there's this getting used to, you know, you have an optical viewfinder that is always the same, regardless of the lens you use. It doesn't change. The only thing that changes depending on the lens you put on is frames in that viewfinder. So you have frames for 50 millimeters, you have frames for 28, 35, and I think 90 millimeters. But that means that if you have the frame for 90 millimeters, it's just a small square right in the center of the whole thing you see. This has advantages and disadvantages. For example, I like to use 50 millimeters. That means there's a medium-sized frame inside and you see outside that frame, and that actually helps you framing your image. If you have the 28 millimeter frame that you want to use because you have a 28 millimeter lens on your camera, for me, for example, using glasses, it's kind of difficult because if I hold it up like this, I do not really see the whole 28 millimeter frame without looking basically from side to side. That's something you have to live with if you want to. I mean, nobody tells you to buy an Leica, but if you want to use one, that's one of the downsides it has. So these are pros and cons. I think that the pros, if this is what you want to use, are definitely worth it, and the downsides or the cons are something you can either learn to live with, or it's just as it is. You know, that's the way it is. It's not a digital camera, so for example, you don't see your image right away. That's the way it is. But for everything else, it's a great camera. Now I'll take you to my desk and show you how to operate the camera just briefly, because there's not much to it, how to load a film, and yeah, just to give you a close-up look. Okay, so this is the camera, and as I said, there's not much to it because the settings you can change are quite few. You have your focus ring here, then you have your aperture ring, then you have your shutter speed settings that go from 1/1000th of a second down to 1 second, and bulb mode, and the frame counter, and that's it. You have this lever here in the front, like this, and this is the frame selector. So regardless of the lens you have on the camera, you can preview other frame lines for within your rangefinder. And this is about it. And then you have this little R lever that is to rewind the film, and you have this little door that you unscrew, and here you have your batteries for the light meter. And since it's only for the light meter, the camera works even without batteries in it. So how do you work the camera? You, depending on the settings you want to have, you select your shutter speed and then adapt the aperture accordingly, or vice versa. You select the aperture you want and then you adapt the shutter speed accordingly. So let's say you want to have a narrow depth of field. You will go, in this case, this is the 50 millimeter 1.4 Summilux, and you will go to 1.4, and then you will have little arrows in the screen showing which way you have to turn this dial to compensate or to change, to adapt the shutter speed. There's not much else. There's a hot shoe, but there's no TTL metering on this version, so nothing electronic basically. It's just something, you know, you close a circuit and flash a light, but that's all there is. To focus, you have this little tab down here. I'm trying to show it to you, that you basically, you hold your finger underneath it. Let me try to see if it's visible, and you turn it around like this. And real experts, which I'm not, according to the position this little tab is in, will exactly be able to tell you the distance it's focusing on. But well, that's you know, that's overkill in my perspective. Unless this is not, I mean, this is not a fast camera anyway, so I don't think this really makes a difference. So this is just your focusing, your aperture, your shutter speed, and that's it. And now I will just quickly show you how you load a film. So you turn the camera around, you lift this little tab, turn it around, remove the bottom of the camera, then you open the back, you take your film, and then basically you follow the instructions or the graphic here. You insert it on one side, you pull it out until it reaches this kind of well, the catch part on the other side here. I'm trying to show it to you a little bit closer. So this is where the film roll goes in. This is how far you have to put it out to load it. Then you put it in, check on the back, close it. Then you start cranking and you see whether it catches, and it caught. Then you close the camera, lock it, and then you activate the shutter until you reach the 0 position, and then to check whether it caught correctly, you can turn this crank and see if there's a certain resistance. And don't overdo it, but if you feel that it stops at a certain point, it means that it's properly inserted. And now we can start taking a picture. Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. You have to set the ISO to have the light meter work properly. And setting the ISO works like this. This is a 160 ISO film. So you basically go up here, and this is more or less the position it should be in, you know? This is just for the light meter to work correctly. And that's it. So if you like it, this is definitely a great camera. I wouldn't say to start, but well, actually you can even start with this one. It may be a little bit more expensive than other options you have, but it's definitely a great learning camera. It's definitely a camera that will last you forever. And it's definitely a camera that will teach you a lot about the basics of photography. Probably a lot more than a fully automatic camera that does everything for you, but not necessarily everything as you want it. So this is my personal favorite film camera of all times. I still enjoy using it very, very much, and I think so would you. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.